together, and that will be good enough to begin. I thought today we will begin to look at the sadhana of recovery. I wanted to restrict this gathering to those who have had the experience of addiction. And one of the things I wanted to address was a kind of self-deception that can occur for those of you who have had an addiction when you achieve sobriety. The moment you stop using, there's always the presumption that somehow you have recovered. Well, the truth of the matter is that you have still not recovered from that which must be recovered from in the first place. So when I talk about the sadhana of recovery, I am specifically addressing the spiritual necessity of dealing with that which predisposed you to become an addict in the first place. And those of you who have gone through the 12 steps and NAs and so forth and so on, couldn't help but notice that there's really only 2 steps. 1, come out of denial. 2, to resort to a spiritual power. All the other steps are simply the unfoldment of that resorting to God, or whatever your concept of God is. So fundamentally, recovery is a spiritual process. Are you following me? And that spiritual process can only begin once you stop using. It doesn't end once you stop using. And so many of you are presumed to think, is this a guest of ours come? Sure. So we're going to talk about the sadhana of recovery. And I'm going to talk primarily within the context of those of you who are on the path. Those of you who are not on the path, well, you're going to have to stretch, quite frankly. The sadhana of recovery. Sadhana simply means the spiritual practice. Sadhana means spiritual practice. So essentially, we're talking about the spiritual practice of recovery. It's a very different thing. There cannot be any recovery if there's not a sadhana, and a profound sadhana at that. Now, it shouldn't come as any surprise to you that all addiction is rooted in ego disorders. You had an ego disorder, fundamentally. And that is what predisposed you to become an addict in the first place. So we're going to also today be looking at the egoic basis of addiction. Now, there are different modes or levels of ego. We're not going to go into all of that today. It's not enough time. But there is a kind of sense of self that is fundamentally based on the identification with your physical body and all of the relationships that are associated with the physical body. There is yet another mode of ego that is fundamentally based on your emotions, the way you feel, and your identification with that. And of course, there's a kind of ego that is associated with your opinions, your thinking, your philosophy, your worldview, etc. So these dimensions each generate a kind of sense of self. Because it is egoic, by definition, it is a state of suffering, because it is always characterized by some form of seeking. Fundamentally, your addiction was simply a sign of your inability to cope with your own pain. either at the level of your body, your emotions, or your mind. That's all that's really about. Addicts are fundamentally people who do not know how to appropriately cope with their own pain and suffering. Let us have a little discussion about it. Hopefully we will have other occasions together like this, so we're not going to try to exhaust everything in this next hour or so. But I am offering you these considerations and arguments not as something for you to just blindly accept. You must truly understand it. Each of you who have been an addict, looking into that, are you able to see how your addiction arose out of your inability to cope with your own suffering? And it's usually an area of your emotions, a kind of emotional neurosis occurred in you. You got stuck in one of the lower developmental stages. You became self-contracted emotionally. Now, this is really interesting, just to say a little bit more about it to stimulate your minds this morning. There are fundamentally 7 stages of life. Life is developmental. Life is an unfoldment. I'm not going to go through all the stages, but we certainly want to look at the first 3 stages. The first 3 stages, what characterizes them all is there is a kind of adaptation that must occur. When the jiva, the soul, first incarnates into the physical body, there requires a number of years in order to adapt to this physical body, to learn how to use it. Are you following me? Learning how to walk, talk, so forth and so on. It's about 7 years or so is spent to just fully adapt to this physical body, how to use it physically, so forth and so on. During this particular phase, the individual is fairly dependent. Very dependent, because someone has to help us to walk and teach us all of this, and you tend to be very dependent. It is called the oral stage. By oral, it means that you have to be fed. It's nutritive by nature. Your mother has to put you on her breast. You can't feed yourself. You see, all your nutrition and sustenance comes from the outside. You have not yet learned how to do all of that stuff for yourself. There is a kind of dependency that characterizes the oral stage of development. Here at the emotional level of adaptation, one is now finally beginning to learn how to function independently. But here's where most addicts get stuck. They get caught up in this process of always seeking to be dependent upon others for their nutritive needs, whether they be at the level of the bodies, et cetera, et cetera. Are you following me? Somewhere in your life, you simply became dependent. You became stuck emotionally. You became neurotic. And you are pathologically dependent upon others to meet your needs. That's what happens to an addict. Stuck. They have not really fully adapted. They're still caught up in this kind of rejection of anybody in any situation or circumstance that does not allow you to be passively dependent. Are you following me? You must exclude those individuals from your life on whom you cannot be passively dependent and fed, nurtured, and so forth and so on. And the pain arises because invariably people will start rejecting you. So the first level of pain that you don't know how to cope with is the pain of being rejected, with people not allowing you to remain passively dependent upon them. That's rejection. And the addicts simply do not know how to relieve the pains of rejection. Now, there's still much more that can be said about all of this stuff. But I am trying to draw for you a kind of initial template that enables you to really appreciate what has to happen now that you're on the path. You must simply start addressing all of these issues. You're simply giving up your drugs and your alcohol. It's inadequate. That's not good enough for what you want. You must really, truly enter into the side of a real recovery. No fooling, no kidding. And make all of those changes and adaptations and growth that is necessary for the spiritual transaction to really occur in your life. Otherwise, it will not occur. You will simply bring to the path the demonstration of your same old addictive behavior because you really haven't overcome it. You simply have stopped drinking and using drugs. That's all. But your addicting ego and that whole mindset is still alive and well and kicking. It's underground, it's covered up, still functioning. You're still not able to handle your own pain. And you will still find yourself passively dependent in a very oral sense in terms of your relationships, so forth and so on. And this is what must be seen, and thus, once seen, overcome, and dealt with. We're going to have a little time to expand all of this. As you all know, those of you who are not new to me, I always try to give you a little bit of a theoretical overview, and then we plunge headlong into it. Face everything. Avoid nothing. Your addiction was fundamentally your attempt to not face anything and to avoid everything that is painful. How are you going to do that? The addict ambition was to somehow live a painless existence. How are you going to do that? Your attempt was to always avoid some level of pain, primarily at the level of your emotions, psychologically speaking. And all of your energies went into avoidance. That's all addiction is. It's an escape. So an escape route. But the problem is, of course, your development remains arrested. And you simply never acquire the skills and strength to appropriately cope with your own pain and suffering. Now, the thing to begin to consider, beloveds, is what was the pain and suffering that you could not face and was trying to avoid in the first place? Because on the path, that's what you're going to have to deal with. Ordinarily, one of the things you were trying to avoid was responsibility. This is really interesting. Addicts tend to be very irresponsible people. They are trying to avoid being responsible. You understand? Their whole strategy is to find some situation, circumstance, person, place, or thing, attach themselves to it in a very passive and dependent way to avoid being responsible. The path requires you to be responsible for yourself in every level. What I have called get straight, financially, sexually, in every sense. Now, if you have not been able to get straight in the past, what makes you think you're going to be able to get straight now? It's going to take more than reading these books and listening to my arguments. You're going to have to change. No fooling, no kidding. So today I wanted to address the real side of me. And I wanted to address it for those of you who have had an addiction because that says something about you. Your addiction says something about you, doesn't it? Let's generally consider what does addiction say about the person. In terms of their level of development across these stages of life. And I'm not asking the question rhetorically. I expect input from you. And certainly, you, in your notes, you should be finding these things out about yourself. Yes, beloved.
You get to locate where you were arrested because there's an arrest there. There's something that there's a stage that you got stuck at, and that's the stage where you get to look.
Yes, of course, you have to locate the stage where you are stuck. But what can we tease out of the addict's state?
In my case, one of the things that I have seen and still see is that what my addiction says about me is that I want to cover up all my inadequacies so that it looks like I don't have any.
Sure, and that's a kind of pain, isn't it?
Yeah.
You want to, what we call in the business, save face. Right? You want to save face,
Yeah.
right? The persona that you're still struggling with adapting to the expectation of society. You got your face on, you can't get your face straight, right? Trying to save face so that you will not be rejected, right? Saving face on the basis of your fear of rejection by others, and intimate others, society as a whole. You're trying to keep your face up, right? Excellent. We're going to the heart of it. Yes, beloved.
Feel or remove the feeling of unworthiness.
Yeah, again, that has a lot to do with the same saving face thing, right? If I can act like I am worthwhile, then I am worthwhile. But deep down inside, there's a great disbelief about it. Yes, beloved?
Early on, what I sought to do was to maintain that feeling, how I felt in a deep sleep, and how I felt when I was full.
Yes.
So I wanted to feel full and be in that deep sleep, the kind with no dreams. I still do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Peace. Rest. You wanted to somehow avoid all conflict.
Yes.
All right?
Yep.
For a minute. You was in a state of avoidance. Avoidance to the point of rendering yourself unconscious. Is that about right? And avoiding what? Yeah, you try to avoid the fear of rejection by trying to keep yourself as unconscious as possible. And isn't that what drugs do? Sure they do. But you must find out, what did your addiction say about you? No fooling, no kidding. And not what it says in the big blue book. Look into your life, sit it in the palm of your hand and find that out. Because that is what you must deal with in the sadhana of recovery. Until you do that, you are still fundamentally an addict and disguised. Your addiction is simply taking another form. You are still fundamentally avoiding, aren't you? You're still fundamentally terrified about rejection. Fundamentally? Yes, beloved.
It's three things it's waiting, being told no, and being told goodbye.
All
Those
right,
three things.
expand that. What do you mean by that?
Endings, anything that felt good, I did not want it to ever end.
What was your third one?
Saying goodbye.
That's ending.
Yeah, waiting, being told no.
Rejection.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, we talked about that. You were trying to avoid rejection in life. You were trying to avoid loss,
Yes. Or grief.
which, well,
Yes,
loss must precede grief, right? You're trying to avoid rejection. We know all of that.
I want to be
What
gratified.
about just waiting? What's up with that?
What I want right now,
Yeah.
I want to be gratified. Instant gratification, right now.
Endlessly.
Not knowing how to do anything.
Impulse, impulsivity, inability to delay gratification, and so forth and so on. Is that the same as what you meant by waiting? I get a sense you had some other kind of.
It's the gap of emptiness. The thing that I say that I want is the very thing that I reject. And what I mean by that is that I have experienced on occasion in the gap of nothingness. However, I still avoid it at all costs.
But come back, talk to me more about this waiting.
What happens when I'm seeking something or ask the question in the time that it takes for it to actually happen.
You can't wait? Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
The inability to wait.
The inability to
Well,
wait.
that's the same thing that Dr. just
Yes.
pointed out. You don't have any patience. You lack tolerance. Because you're in a state of pain. It's hurting, and you want that pain to end right now. What else does your addiction, in your notes or in your mind, make a note? What do your addiction say about you? What did it say about you? Yes, beloved.
What it said to me, Master, is that I had all of this was based on a misconception of how I should be.
Acha.
In younger years, the cool thing was out. I went after patterns of, people who were labeled, classified as being acceptable to the community and everything. So I placed a value on that.
Face. Right,
And,
right.
And it had brought on all of these. It was a prerequisite for all of these things that have been mentioned.
Right.
So
You could not handle
I
the
didn't
loss
like
of
it.
faith.
Right. I didn't like
Right.
what
And what is, and that says something about you, though. Right? Yes, beloved.
One thing also I see is that I didn't like and don't like the fact that I'm not perfect.
Good. What else?
I could go again with the waiting part, procrastination, putting things off, again, avoidance.
Yeah, not facing anything, trying to avoid. You didn't want to face things. You wanted to avoid. Yes, beloved.
Not being perfect, also the world is not perfect.
And that the world is not perfect.
In from my perception,
Uh-huh. And that caused you pain,
yeah.
right? Because how can your desires and expectations be met and fulfilled by a world that is not perfect? Perhaps. See, I don't know, but this is what you gotta find this out. Yes, beloved.
Setting yourself apart from.
Yeah, sure. That's classic, isn't it? We call that, you exempt yourself, you withdraw. You isolate. And all of those things.
And I want to control. I want to.
Yes, you want to control. You want to control things so that you can prevent rejection, blah, 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 blah.
For me, it was, I guess, a kind of escapism from who I was and my perceived self. And getting alcohol and drugs gave me a sense of having more nerve or courage.
Yes, yes.
A
Remember,
false sense of-
I've said that fundamentally ego is really, addiction is based in ego. And I've said your addiction is simply a sign of your inability to cope with your own pain. All right? So I want to unpack from this premise, all right? And not get too psychological. Your addiction was not psychoanalytic. You understand? You were responding to something right there. You see my point? You didn't become an addict after analysis. Right? Yes, beloved.
Shame,
Shame.
that will allow you to withdraw and cover up so that you might be faced with that.
Right. Save that face. Avoid that. The question I'm asking you, what were you trying to avoid? Fundamentally.
Feelings.
Huh?
Feelings.
Yeah. And in your case, you gotta make your list very specific. Looking within your actual life, at the time that the addiction occurred, what was going on in your life that you were trying to avoid? What was causing you the pain that you could not cope with? You see? Failures? You were failing at that time? Failing in what sense? I don't want vague answer, specifics. Were you failing on the job? Were you failing in your relationship? You got to be very specific with this stuff.
Failing and not meeting what you perceive others' expectations of.
Okay. You were failing to conform to the expectations of others in society. You know what I mean? Is that what was happening? You couldn't save face. You were losing face. Right? And that was painful.
It came to the point that I became useless and not even wanting to attempt
Sure.
to do anything anymore. Everyone is commenting, you're a failure.
Right.
Why go against
Right.
the majority?
I understand. Yeah.
You just,
Avoid.
Yeah.
You want to avoid in that instance. Right. Yes, beloved. Now, and remember, beloved, this is the same challenge that is before you now. It has not changed. If you still remain not capable of dealing with rejection by others, you have already found some other way to deal with your pain that is also addictive. In fact, one of the things you must begin to consider is what has been the new form that your addiction has taken in your life. Make a note of it. Go on a search, find it. Yes, you stopped drinking, but you ain't stopped avoiding. Are you following me?
Yeah.
You're still avoiding. You're just not drinking. Now, what have you came up with now that serves you like your drinking and your drugs used to? That's all. But you must see that. Yes, beloved.
I know a big part of mine was much like Honorable, but mine had looked like my mother, or the people that I perceived to be authority, who I wanted to be approved by. And that you brought that up, things that have taken place have been like outside you, people that I want to get approval from, that those people have become my mother. In this
Yes, it should.
Right.
Right. But it's fundamentally, you're still operating out of the same deficit.
So,
right?
Certainly.
That predisposed you for the addiction in the first place.
And the same feelings, experiences that I have
Yeah.
when I don't measure up. Or
Yes, same pain, same suffering. Sure. Yes, beloved.
The other side of that is what he said he was avoiding. When you get into people pleasing, or you go overboard trying to,
That can be the new form of your addiction, isn't it?
looking, where you were failing before.
Right.
Now you want to look good. You want to prove something.
Yes, yes,
You know.
yes. All right, that's very true. Yes, beloved.
What I found when because I looked at some, but basically I had a real great fear of being alone, adult, that I needed to be with somebody or have something. I was afraid of being by myself.
Being what I call absolutely responsible. Remember I said that fundamentally the addict is a person that is fundamentally irresponsible. Fundamentally. They're irresponsible. They haven't handled that business of making the transition from the oral state to the next state. They're irresponsible. They haven't handled the fundamental business of life. There are some, for instance, and it's really interesting that your addiction seems to just really escalate the more you enter into adulthood. Like as soon as you get there, it starts really taking off. Because in adulthood, you're confronted now, right? Because society is no longer permitting you to be passively dependent, not even your parent. It means go out there and get your ass a job. And you don't have a... So usually the struggle is in the area of money, food, and by food I don't mean just physical food, but all kinds of nutritive experiences, right? Sex. It's very interesting, this one. I have found, at least in my practice, over the years, that there's a very real correlation between how you are sexually and how you are emotionally. They reflect each other. It's very interesting. Addicts tend to be emotionally neurotic. Emotionally, they are contracted. They don't know how to function emotionally. That part of their being is not developed. They don't know how to get all that business straight. By emotionally neurotic, I mean they have this kind of terrifying fear of rejection in being unloved. And you follow me? Not being allowed to be passively dependent on someone terrifies the addict who is stuck. You follow me? And so whenever they are having the experience of being unloved or rejected, they want to punish that person or flee that situation and so forth and so on. You see, they are contracted. They don't know how to handle all of that. And they tend to bring that same inability over in their sex. You see? So their sexuality and their emotionality are reflections of each other.
Possibly be that you actually lack any emotions. You got one emotion, fear.
What it is,
And you have
what it
no
is
feelings.
the individual has not grown up emotionally. They're still not able to function in a way beyond the oral stages. You follow me? They have not become self-validating. They've not become self-validating, and therefore they are dependent upon outside validation. And they are terrified when that outside validation is not forthcoming or is threatening, et cetera, et cetera.
And with that, we go seeking to find some way of being to receive acceptance.
Yeah, sure. And that's what caused you to create the persona, you paint the face, you do whatever what Sadasi was mentioning, right?
You one way with this person, another way.
That's
Every
right.
person you with, you got another persona.
That's right. That's right.
Wearing a lot of hats.
That's right. See, this is the fundamental argument that we made, beloveds, when we talked about the necessity to be loved in the midst, whether you're feeling loved or not, that you are obligated on the path to be loving. The addict simply cannot be loving in a context where they're experiencing rejection. That whole impulse is to avoid that. Hence, they have trouble developing stable relationships. That's one of the signs. The moment that relationship becomes unloving, the addict is usually out of there, or they withdraw on the peripheral of the relationship. You see my point? And they come back out in the relationship when the coast is clear and there's nothing. You see my point? They're always scanning the relationship, monitoring it, and only participating in it if the coast is clear. And that is what the path requires of you. That's why I said it. You must get this now, because your addiction already demonstrates that in the past you have not been able to get this. So when you come to the path, and I call you to the radical demonstration of love, in the midst, whether you being loved or rejected, is no longer a valid excuse for your withdrawal from relationship. You won't be able to do it. You have not been able to do it in the past. And you'll be stuck. Are you following me? So it's this business that has not been handled. Now, of course, I'm leaving out your biography and your whole history of how you were parented, blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? I've done that number, right? And so you all know, can get all the tapes and all of that on that. I'm not going to waste time on that. Talk to me about the addict and his money.
Gotta have some money, man.
Huh?
Gotta have some money.
Gotta have some money, right?
And any way to get it.
And any way to get it.
And won't keep it, that's right. And won't keep it. No. Just get it, just to spend it, to get high.
Yeah.
Change.
Yeah.
I've done
And the money that you need for real life, where, you see, because all your money is into your drugging.
Yep.
But you actually need money for real life, real living. Food, clothing, shelter, rent, car note, mortgage payment. The addict is financially irresponsible for what real life takes. Fundamentally. They must be taken care of in the areas of real life. And when you stop drinking and drugging, very often that scenario don't change. Now you are still financially dependent upon others for matters pertaining to your real life upkeep. Sober, but still dependent. And on the path I call you, you have to get straight. You must become financially responsible for taking care of yourself. Otherwise, you cannot create a context for real practice. Are you following my argument? You must be able to do that business, handle that business. And addicts have trouble handling that kind of business. A lot more can be said about dealing with this money, food, sex dimension. But I again want to turn your attention back to the basic arguments here. I want you to again stay focused on what is it about what does your addiction, what did your addiction say about you? What did your addiction point out that was undeveloped in you? Yes, beloved.
One thing mine continually pointed out was my inability to stick to anything. I mean, I was all over the place. Even when I was using, I followed a different path, well, you know, small little paths then.
Yes.
And even then, I couldn't stick to any of them either.
Right, right. Inability to, lack of commitment, to be committed,
right.
to function.
Right.
Yes, yes, beloved, and then this sister
Inability to complete, not just follow, but to
couldn't even complete.
you know, so you every time you get close to succeed, something would come up. In my case, something would come up to keep me from. I might go all the way to junior year in college. Something comes up, I don't get a degree. You see what I'm saying?
I understand.
Always something.
Always something. Yes, beloved.
The inability to feel real love.
Inability to feel real love. I like that. Make a note of that. You got your notepad, you write that down. That's a nugget. That's coming to the heart of it. Mahadashi, you had something to say about it, beloved?
I was just, from my experience, mine was marijuana. 26 years of using marijuana. So my high was an inexpensive high, but it was a good high. For me, it was all of the above. Responsibility and pain. And I just, when something hits, okay, just don't bother me. That was my scapegoat.
Yes.
But you said something about it taking another form.
Yes.
As far as the avoidance, you put sex and food.
Oh yes, all of that.
All of that.
All of that can get abused. All of that can become replacement forms of your addiction. And that's really what I'm calling you to look at and search out and try to discover what have been the replacement forms of your addiction, right? Because if you have not been able to really deal with the initiating pain and dukkha that triggered the addiction in the first place, then fundamentally you still where you was. Now I really want to drive this point home because it's a subtle one. I don't want you to miss sight of it. I am saying that your addiction occurred in the first place because you could not manage and cope with your own pain. Whether that pain was physical or psychological or emotional or social. But the reality is that your addiction is a sign of your failure, your actual developmental inability to deal with suffering, pain, and when things don't go your way, and so forth and so on. Now life is still not going your way. And you're still having some dukkha, aren't you?
Yeah.
All right. Now what are you doing with it?
Sexing it up.
You sexing it up? That's why you sit back. I never see you two sitting near each other. My savior always try to get him some rest. Sex.
Mass is sex, seriously. And
Yes, I
my
understand.
question is, what about that desire?
Yeah.
What happens to that? You get that desire. Like for me in the past, you get those desires, but for me, from my experience, they come up, but it's my attention. I have to
Yes, yes.
reverse my
Well, you see, that's how people become sex addicts, isn't it? Right? Because that sex now is doing the same thing as the drugs did. Right? It's giving you some way to be distracted from or relieved of this suffering. But it is temporary. So you got to go get another hit. Another hit. Some people, it's not actually the actual sex that occurs between partners. In therapy, what I find most often, the most usual form of this kind of sexual addiction is pornography and masturbation. You see, that's how they do it, right? So like they used to run to the corner, now they run to the washroom or the bedroom, right? And gratify themselves, blah, 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 blah. And then they, until the, you know, the wave of dukkha rise again. Yeah, work can be that thing. Yeah, work. Sure. But it's performing the same function, isn't it? All right? Yes, beloved.
What I found is, what I have to do is constantly distinguish between the present and past, because I can bring up an experience that may have some identification with what I'm getting ready to do at this moment. And what I'll do is bring up, my reaction to that experience in the present.
Okay, you go get some past suffering.
I get some past pain,
Bring it-
suffering,
and add to the present pain.
Say welcome
and
to the
become
present.
overwhelmed.
Welcome to the present. So let's govern this situation
Yes.
by the
Yes.
experience that it was there.
I understand.
So
Yeah,
that's-
you kind of
that's a
drag it
concept.
around.
Yeah,
Right.
that's something to
Sure.
answer.
Folks, the thing is, find out why you were not able to cope with your own suffering and pain. That's what you need to find out. And that's what you must become capable of doing. That's right.
With your addiction because of something,
Right, that's
some
what I'm saying.
inadequacy.
Sure.
You go through the spiel of addiction, and
Right.
all this miseries, and this adding on to it, and then you're right back where you started at. This was
Absolutely
your
right.
problem.
In the
In
first
the first
place.
place.
That's exactly my argument, too.
So you go through your whole addiction spiel just
Sure.
to come right back because that problem was never addressed.
Was never addressed.
So
And
it's responded.
That's right, sponge. You see? And so the thing is that when you come to the past, so that you don't use it as a part of your drug. Don't bring the addict mindset here.
Yeah.
You follow me?
Right.
The past is not to function in your life like a drug. It's not what it's about. The past is very different. I call you to deal with that, to face it, and stop avoiding it. And go through that whole ordeal. Deal with that. Look at it. Become very cognizant of it. See it. And then deal with that. Otherwise, you would tend to do the same thing with this path. You use it, right, as a means of avoiding. So you'll come to satsang, this become just, a way to, give yourself a little psychological, mental, emotional boost, so forth and so on. A hit. Same pattern.
Same thing.
You must truly enter into the sadhana of recovery. The sadhana of recovery really talks about dealing with this, doesn't it? Now, what is necessary to really deal with this? We'll take this comment, and then we're going to come down.
I think one of the main things for me was to understand that in the path of life, that it is normal to have pain.
Yes.
I didn't realize that. At some point, I was so sheltered that I didn't realize that everybody didn't have the advantages that I had.
Yeah.
Everybody didn't have the same talents that I had.
Yes.
Everybody didn't have the same
Yes.
morals. And when I met people that did not fit up to what I thought was supposed to be, it was like, it's not supposed to be this way. I didn't realize that that's really the way it's supposed to be.
Right, absolutely. And you were predisposed then to become an addict by the way you were parented. That's why I said I'm not going to go into the biography of it all, right? But there's certainly something in your own background, the way you were parented and handled.
And when life hit me, it was like,
Right.
I don't know what to do. So I started shutting down
Sure.
from all of those other things,
Yes.
tools that I had, because it was like something just hit me in my face.
Yes.
And once I got back to the point to realize that this is the way life is.
Right. Once you was able to accept
Right.
the reality of how things are. And that's one of the things that the addict cannot do. That's what keeps them an addict. The inability to accept life the way it is. To accept and see things the way it is. Part of the addiction is rooted in the non-acceptance of reality. This is interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
Part of your addiction fundamentally arose from your unwillingness or inability or immaturity to accept life as life comes. Right. Yeah. Right. That's right.
Steps was to learn to accept life the way it was and to do the best that I can in the circumstances
Sure,
which I'm in.
sure. And that's the normal way to handle life, isn't it? Isn't it?
Yeah.
But the addict is not normal. The addict is still developmentally arrested. They can't function like normal people. You understand me?
Yeah.
And even when you stop drugging and drinking, you're not normal yet. You just stop drugging and drinking. That's all. And yes, you see, in these AA meetings and NA meetings, you know, they get all caught up in this glorification. You know what I mean? They actually think they've done something grand. It's nice. I mean, don't misunderstand me. I'm not diminishing the progress. That's a big step. But you ain't finished, and you certainly are not recovered, and you're certainly not in any way, shape, form, or fashion above average. It's just taking you till you 40 years old to get normal. That's all that's saying about you. That's all. For 20 years of your life, you were stuck emotionally and psychologically at the level of a 7-year-old child somewhere in terms of your relationship and expectations of life. That's all that's said about you. There's nothing to get all high on your ass about. Be that as it may, now you must come back to the real deal here. Now, there's always some aspect going on in your life right now that is you're required to accept and then deal with on the basis of that reality. Is that about right? Begin to look at it. Start looking at that. Are you still avoiding? Are you still refusing to face the reality? Got all kinds of other strategies, but fundamentally, are these simply strategies of avoidance? Pain of the psychological variety, and usually of the emotional variety, is not the outcome of any kind of disease. We talk about the disease model of addiction. Well, that's necessary in order to get the insurance company to pay for it. You understand? Your disease is that you're immature. That's your disease. That's about it. You know what I mean? Now, a lot of your agony and anguishness that you encounter that makes up your pain, that makes life painful in the first place for you, is your refusal to accept it. Your refusal to accept it. And wanting it to be other than the way it is. At the mental level, for instance, a lot of addicts simply can't handle boredom. Most addicts can't handle boredom. because boredom takes another level of maturity, right? Boredom and impulsivity, you know what I mean? There's a correlation, isn't it? Right? They can't handle that. That's too painful. Oh, no way, hell no. Hell no. So I had so much trouble in meditation because, you see, in meditation, you got to learn how to handle boredom. That's what is required, isn't it? Yep. When you start meditating, it's not going to be lights, camera, action for years. You understand? Yes, yeah, it is boring for you. Right. You mean in him? Then the practitioner. Okay. Yes.
Sure.
Okay, I will be clear.
You're creating.
Sure. Sign is that.
That's right. That's true. And you will experience boredom and all of these things on the basis of your sense of self. Now today we're not going to have a chance to really go into that in any great detail. But even your sense of self and identity plays a large role in it. You follow me? So there is really an esoteric dimension of your addiction. It's not just psychological, sociological, so forth and so on. What is even more interesting is this esoteric dimension and factor of your addiction, what it says about you spiritually. That it is signs of a kind of spiritual deficit. You see? And that's always shocking. You know? That's always shocking. A kind of moral deficit. You see? Sure. A kind of rebellion against authority, the authority of your conscience. Very often you see your alcoholism and your drug is just a surface thing. Very often what makes the drug necessary is that it's the only way you can excuse your behavior. I'm a drug addict. That's why I don't work. You can come up with a good reason you can give somebody. You know, I'm an alcoholic, Bhagwan. I can't hold down no job. It's the alcoholism. And if I get off my alcohol, I guess I can work. Bullshit. Take you off your alcohol, you still can't work. You see my point? It's just a way of giving yourself an excuse. Actually, you use your drugs to save face. This is crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
To yourself. You know what I mean? You sit down and you fantasize, man, I would have been this and that if I hadn't got caught up in these drugs. You're trying to save face. You're blaming all of the failure on your drugs. All right? It helps you save face. But the truth of the matter is, you're doomed to be a failure in the first place because you don't have the stuff. And I'm calling you to deal with this. Deal with this. Deal with this now. And get straight. Yes, beloved.
The save face. What about the denial aspect of that?
Yes, there's another side to it, the denial side. I am simply talking about using it to save face, using it as a way to make an excuse to emphasize the spiritual and moral deficit side of it. Very often, our behavior that we tend to engage in under the influence of our drugs and alcohol is a form of rebellion against our own conscience. You follow me? It is an act of rebellion against authority in the form of your own conscience. Now, let's say, for instance, my conscience is, and the way I was parented and so forth tells me that, well, I shouldn't steal, right? Well, I am not spiritually and morally mature enough to submit to being governed by that imperative. And my impulse is to steal, and I want to steal, but I'm conflicted now. How to steal and still, some kind of way, shape, or form or fashion, acknowledge, you know what I mean, the validity of that, of my own conscience. Well, if I can get drunk, right, and then go break in and steal, I can always say, well, I only did that because I was drunk. I wouldn't have done that if I wasn't drunk. You see? Right. Yeah, I'm using that now. I have to find some kind of way to rationalize your behavior. Find out, how did you rationalize your behavior during your addiction? Find that out. Because you did that. You were able to come up with a way of rationalizing your behavior for 20 years or 15 years or 10 years. How did you do that? How did you do that? I mean, really find that out.
You know what I'm seeing here in denial piece? Can it protect you from actually seeing that so it won't go into the
Yes, sure. You have to now practice a kind of combination of denial and plus rationalization. A combination. You have to both deny and rationalize. You need the denial to protect you. Right. It's a way of avoidance. The truth, isn't it? The denial is your means of avoiding the truth of how you live it. Totally inconsistent with your own conscience. Right? I got to go into denial, and sometimes I can't even get that deep in denial, so I got to use a little rationalization to help me. Right? So I bring in my psychoanalytic theories, my disease model, the white man, you know what I mean? I draw from all sources, you know what I mean? And I finally come up with some that work, and now I can do my addiction for the next 20 years. You know? Yeah, ain't that bad. Yeah, you do that, a comparative analysis between yourself and other addicts, you know. I'm a clean addict. I ain't down on Cicero selling my body. You know what I mean? I ain't hurting nobody, right? I still work. I still go to work every day, right? I ain't lost my kids. There you go. So you add some rationalization to some denial, and voila, there you have it. And I'm simply saying that you got to look at all of that. You do. Now, if a person wasn't, well, most people are addicted at some level, but here you just simply got caught up in a kind of gross level of addiction, right? Which is a sign that you really, you know what I mean? Right? That you really got arrested somewhere. That's all right. But now we still got to handle that business, don't we? Sure we do. It's not a matter of being ashamed or anything. We just got to step up and handle this business. Sure.
Facing that, the stealing, the cheating, the lying.
Yes, they'll commit suicide.
Comfort.
Sure, it comforts. It's a drug. And beloved, you will note that denial has a legitimate function in human nature. Otherwise, you would not even have the capacity for it. There are things called positive denial, and then there's negative denial, and you have to enjoy the distinction between the two. But there's a certain level of denial that we all do. For instance, you get on the expressway every day, but you have to go into a state of denial that you ain't going to get killed. Because a part of you know that, man, you know, it's going to be 10,000 people killed out here, right?
Yeah.
And so forth and so on. Because if you cannot come to a certain level of denial about the possibility of getting wiped out on a Dan Ryan, you'll have too much anxiety. You follow me? You'll have too much anxiety. So denial is a normal mechanism that functions in human psychology for the purposes of reducing levels of anxiety to a degree that you can function. But in the case of the addict, you understand, there's anxiety is so immense because of their fear of rejection. Do you know how terrifying a life lived on fear of rejection is?
Yeah, I do.
You do? Huh? Do you know the stress and tension that builds up in the body mind trying to save face all the time? Do you know the pressure that is involved in being passively dependent upon other people? Always got to be able to persuade them so that you can have your real life needs met. All of the pleasing you got to do because you're fundamentally in the posture of a beggar. You're a child. You're oral. You're passively dependent. Right? I mean, that's a lot of shit. No! That's a lot of stress, right? So ordinary, normal levels of denial, that ain't gonna work. I gotta access the very deepest depth of my capacity for denial and then add some more stuff. I may have to form a confederation with other similar people so that we can collectively pool our denial together.
Yes.
So I create a kind of Sangha, don't I? A kind of vital association, right? And we meet up with each other each morning as we sitting up, cooking up, or snorting, or whatever we're doing, and we present our cases for being exempt from.
Right.
Yes, beloved, and then you, Pujabaji.
The idea for me, the idea of pain.
Acha.
We are here,
Yes.
and a part of the process of living is this pain that we have to deal with.
Yes.
And for me, that was like, sometimes now, I ask, why does there, in this world, have to be this type of pain? And having a Christian background and their rationale for why the human existence must deal with
Be so dreadful.
pain. Right?
That's right. So
And
dreadful.
for me, that was like, it's a question that I still have not.
You see, beloved, that's a perennial question. That is a good question. I mean, it can produce breakdown and you become a drug addict, or breakthrough and you become a mystic. The addict and the mystic both are responding to the reality of dukkha. It's just that the addict is the immature individual's response to that. It is a kind of regression. The mystic response is a kind of transcendence. So you start finding out what is it that is suffering. Interesting. I mean, the mystic goes into it. The mystic goes into pain. The addict goes away from pain. Because pain is the reality. Now, the addict's attempt to avoid pain did not bring pain and suffering in their life to an end, did it?
No, it increased it.
I mean, were you successful?
No.
Come on, don't patronize me. You must have been getting something out of it. Nothing?
Temporary, but it didn't end anything. No.
It didn't end for you, beloved?
You know what? I did it as long as I could. Now, I was getting something out of it. I wasn't like these people say, oh, after the first one, I don't get mine. I got every one. Every one. And I didn't drop nothing. I didn't spill nothing. I didn't set none on fire. But the insanity that I suffer with now is that I can see myself doing what doesn't work, and I see that it doesn't work.
You see the
None
futility.
of them. And I also see the big drug, because for me, it is the Samgat that I've created. And it is philosophy and religion. Now that doesn't work anymore.
That's right.
So I've eliminated a lot of stuff, and you keep telling me I got to give up some more stuff.
Right. Because you got to give up that which is suffering in the
Right.
first place. And
Right.
that's what I'm drawing your attention to. Now, the mystic understood all of that. Right? They looked at that and they saw. Now, you can't avoid it. Right? Now, the addict never gets that. The addict is always operating on the presumption that I can avoid pain.
Some kind of way.
Some kind of way. There's something I can do, something I can avoid.
Some drug I can find.
Some drug I can find, some person I can find, some situation I can find, some sex I can find, some book I can read, some satsang I can come to. It is always based on avoidance. That is what characterized the addict mindset. Remember I said that addiction, the basis of addiction is ego. And ego is always about that activity. The mystic is just the opposite. The mystic goes into the pain, investigates it, looks at it, set it up here, and find out, what is this pain? What is it coming from? What are the causes of my suffering and pain? The mystic began to investigate the causes of my suffering and pain. The addict simply runs. And as the mystic, beloved, begins to investigate the nature of their suffering and pain, they begin to see, first of all, well, what is it that is suffering? Is it the body? Well, they start eliminating the body because the body is not sentient. What is it that is the source of the sentience in the body itself? Because the body in and of itself is not sentient. It is not the knower of pain. Right? So we eliminate the body. Boom. Right. Now we begin to look at that. I mean, it gets very interesting. That is what we do on the path. The path is the process by which you deal with this. It is an ego-transcending process. It is the ego that suffers. Interesting. So the question becomes, what is ego? I mean, you see my point here? So we go into all of that. But that's a very different kind of response to pain, isn't it? Right? It is a positive response to pain in the sense that one is not negative about it, lamentating like you were. It shouldn't be no pain. Why is there pain? I'm so sick of pain. God, why you make pain? I mean, it's always lamenting about it. Always non-acceptance of that reality. You follow me? And the mystic simply accepts that reality and goes into it and then transcends or come into a very different relationship. Now that takes us into a very esoteric dimension, and perhaps we'll get a chance to say more about it maybe even today. But for the sake of our gathering this morning prior to Satsang, I wanted us to have the freedom to really just sit with each other and just be straight up about this without any reservation, without any shame or any of that. But to really start taking a look at yourself, because after all, I ask that those who are on the path come here. You know, and of course there's other of you who are not on the path, but my primary focus this morning is those who are on the path. You see my point? Because when you come to the path, it means that we got to deal with this now, right? And you can't deal with it in your old accustomed ways. You really got to come and you got to deal with this. You must really truly enter into the sadhana of recovery. No fooling, no kidding. No kidding. That is what is before you. You must find out what was it about you that predisposed you to the addiction in the first place. You must find out what was your pain. You must find out what situations in life you were trying to avoid by escaping into your addiction. Were you trying to avoid the pressure that comes with being responsible? I don't know. You must find that out. No fooling. No kidding. And once you find that out, then you must change on the basis of that insight. As you all know, I've said on many occasions, it's about consideration, decision, change. Otherwise, if consideration don't lead to change, this is pointless, right? You must consider and you must decide to change how you have dealt with this thing in the past. Otherwise, you will just go on duplicating it. You think you're not going to run into some of this on the path in the process of meditation and adapting this body-mind to the asanas associated with spiritual growth? You think you're going to avoid this on the path? No. Path is strictly about the sacrifice of ego. right? Tremendous pain, right? It's not going to make it hunky-dory. This is not going to be like that.
Non-acceptance of change.
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
It's
Non-acceptance
that
of change.
change, you know.
Right.
A total unwillingness.
And unwillingness to change.
Right.
Right. And that is a kind of thing that you really got to look at, isn't it?
That's the thing.
And you must find that out. What is it about it? It's fear? Is it fear? You're afraid to change? Or what? You see, when we are entering into these kinds of sanyamas and consideration, beloved, we are trying to generate great insight, great intelligence, great wisdom, great insight into the dilemma, right? Once you have generated your insights into your dilemma, now you must make a decision out of that intelligence. And you must act on that. What has to happen, you see, beloved, you must link your intelligence to your will. Now, the problem with most addicts, they don't have no will. Again, they're immature. They're arrested. That's what you see happening in the instance of impulsivity, in the inability to delay gratification. It's simply the signs of the absence of sufficient will. They can't do what is right. It's not that they don't know what is right. They lack the sufficient will to do it right. Remember the first thing I said, you got to face everything, right? If you just face everything, avoid none, you're going to handle your pain much better. Are you following me?
Yep.
So I summarized my whole argument in that statement. But you understand what I mean by it now. By this, I mean do it right. Do it right. If you do meditation right, yes, you got to deal with some pain. Of course. But if you are avoidance, you won't do your meditation right. And you won't do it right for the same reason you didn't do anything right. Do it right. You got to start doing stuff right and stop cheating. The addict is a cheat. They cheat. They always try to cut corners. They're irresponsible. They come up with all kind of rationalization for it, but fundamentally, you're irresponsible. You cheat. Do it right. Get it right. Do it right. You must really do it right. That's an act of will, isn't it? You must have the will to do it right. Your intelligence, information is useless without the will to implement it. Please make a note. All them books you read, beloved, is meaningless. Meaningless, because you can't do none of the shit. You can talk about it, but that's just talk. It has no value, no cash value. It doesn't change you. Because you're not able to connect it to nothing. You must have some will. Simple as that. On the path, one of the beautiful things about it, that just the very act of engaging in your meditation begins to give you will. Every time you can get up out of that bed in the morning at 4 o'clock or whatever time it is, go against the tendency to lay there and be comfortable, sit down there on that floor and go through that discomfort, you building will. You recover. That's why I call it the sadhana of recovery. You're practicing. You must be practicing a kind of will-building activity so that now you have something to link to your intelligence. Otherwise, it's meaningless. And all that happens on the basis of right understanding and right view. So today we wanted to have the opportunity to stand all of this in the right view so we can see things as they are. Because you're addicted, does that mean you're hopeless, folks?
No.
Of course not. But it does mean you got to work on the path. And you particularly have to work harder than the normal person. You can't afford to drag your ass. You really got to work hard to overcome your inherent deficits. So you got to get clear about all of that. You got to work real hard. You are already patterned to avoid pain. You have already conditioned yourself to avoid pain. You have already figured out all kind of clever ways of using denial and rationalizations in order to avoid that which you find difficult in your life. You perfected it. You got it down to a science, in fact, right? But it ain't gonna go over here. I'm your Waterloo. I'm your brick wall. You know what I mean? And I call you to confront this thing now and really get straight and do this right. Let's do this one right. Anything else to say about it, beloved? We have about 5 or so minutes more. I know we have not even begun to exhaust it, and perhaps if you found this useful, maybe there will be some future occasion where we can also do this again and go to the next level that we will not have a chance to go to today when we begin to examine let me see if I can put this right. What became an addict in the first place? Was that you? Did you really become an addict, or was it something else? I wish I could. What I'm saying, beloved, is that are you the one that became an addict, or are you something that never was a part of your addiction? What becomes an addict? What I'm pointing to now, beloved, is identity, right? Or misidentity. Was your addiction the result of your becoming misidentified? With that which was suffering? Huh? And if you remain misidentified with that which suffers, then there's every possibility that your addiction will continue, isn't it? Isn't it? Are you all patronizing me, or are you seeing the light? You seeing the light here? Right. Seems then that the recovery, in the true sense of the word, from addiction is the transcendence of that is vulnerable to addiction in the first place, isn't it? Seems that as long as you identify with that which suffers, then there's every possibility you will repeat your addiction. All right? So we're going to talk next time. If you think it's a worthwhile hour or so, we'll talk about the transcendence of the egoic basis of addiction. How about that? Would that be all right? Because that's what sadhana is all about, isn't it? You're not going to overcome your addiction anywhere in the realm of ego. There's no such thing as egoically recovering from your addiction. What kind of bullshit is that? I mean, do you see how, you see, it's nonsense, isn't it? Right? I have egoically recovered from my addiction that is the result of my egoity in the first place. Now, this is nonsense. This is self-deception. This is delusional. So we will talk about that then. All right, beloved, shake on. you doing, brother?